search of a full moon. I'm at the beach, but you can see seaweed is just everywhere. So I can't really get the composition I'd like to get with these rocks because the seaweed is just covering just about every place I went. This is the least offensive I could find it all along the beach. But we'll do what we can. Moonrise is actually about a half an hour before sunset, but tomorrow night is the real full moon. Tonight it's about 98-99% full moon. Tomorrow night's the real full moon, but it doesn't come up until half hour or so after sunset. So what I'm hoping is those clouds over there, as we get closer to sunset, are going to light up a little bit, and I can get a couple of long exposures to smooth out the water a little bit. And when that moon does show itself, as it gets higher in the sky, that's when the sky should be dark enough for that moon to be seen over there. At least that's the game plan. Right now I'm going to take a couple long exposures. I'm at f8 ISO 64. I've got a 6-stop filter on it. Try to smooth out the water a little bit. It's still a little too light, and like I said, hopefully those clouds are going to light up and we can get a nice image out of that. So keep your fingers crossed. That's the thing about photographing seascapes and landscapes. Totally dependent on the weather. Now I'm dependent on this ugly seaweed everywhere. If you don't come out and try, then for sure you're not going to get the shot, right? So you have to at least come out and try. What I've decided to do is take a panorama starting from over here and swing it across because of those clouds. Since that's really the subject I have to use instead of these rocks with some of this ugly seaweed, I have to put some of the rocks in. But I've decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try a panorama across, especially if that sky starts to light up, because that's some beautiful clouds there. I'm kind of hoping they're going to turn into some color and I get a nice panorama, and by about that time that moon should be coming up, and that should make for a nice image, I think. So fingers crossed. So for anyone who doesn't know how to do a panorama, how the computer stitches them together anyway, you say File, Automate, Photo Merge, and you should have already gone through and picked out which images you want it to start with. You pick your files, you load them up. Different people have different ideas on which one of these to pick. I usually just pick Auto. It does a pretty good job. If you find that it's not doing, you can always go back and redo it to perspective or cylindrical or whatever. Same down here. I usually leave these blank and I just say okay. Now it's going to take a couple of minutes to put it all together. When you're doing seascapes, it's a lot harder for the computer to stitch it together, which is one of the reasons why I usually like to have the pier or rocks or something that the computer can line up. Like with that pier that you'll see in the final image here. It can line up that pier. I know a lot of times people say, well, you go 2/3, 2/3, or a third. I usually, when it's a seascape, I usually only go maybe 10%, 20% at most. That's why you saw I had so many images. I think I'm using maybe 12 or 13 images, where normally you might only use 4 or 5 for the landscape that I'm actually shooting. And the reason why is because it has a hard time stitching the water together. So I prefer it to really focus on that pier and the rocks, and it just seems to work better that way for me. You can do it any way you want. Just saying for seascapes. Now, if I was shooting a landscape, mountains, something like that, it'd be a different story. But for seascapes, I just find, well, let's just say more is better when it comes to the more data you can use, the more data you can give Photoshop to be able to create this, the better. Photoshop has stitched it together. As you can see, it's done a pretty good job. Now, another tip is when you do a panorama like this, shoot it vertically rather than horizontally, because you'll get more of the top and the bottom that way, so that when you do crop it, you hopefully will have everything that you want it. We're going to crop it. We're probably going to have to rotate it just a little bit to get the horizon line straight. Actually, it did a pretty good job. It's off just a little bit. So we're going to keep just a little bit more. We're going to crop it. And then we're going to select all. Oh, we want to show the grid so that we can see what we're doing here. Then we want to rotate it. Now we want to crop it again. So there's our raw file. There's our stitched together file. Now you say, where's the moon? Aha. Well, like I mentioned in the video, there was so much seaweed. You can't see it because I've done a good job of masking it out. But especially down in this area here, a lot of that looks like rocks. A lot of that was seaweed, and some of this as well. They just had piles and piles of seaweed. And just behind me, just behind where I was standing, were just piles of seaweed. And the reason why there isn't more rock showing is because there was just, I was essentially standing next to a pile of seaweed. And all this down in here that looks brown, that's really seaweed coming in. And so you can kind of see it in here. So it was really difficult for me to get the composition to line up where I want it to stand and get the angles that I wanted. It was just, I had to make the decision of standing in seaweed for a long time, having too much seaweed in the image, or go this route. So I decided to go this way. The moon was just off to this side here. We're going to move the moon a little bit. I admit we're going to move it, but that's what we're going to do. I had to make that game time decision. You can say, oh, well, that's not the proper image. It's still the same moon. It's still at the same time, same everything. We're just going to move it a few feet. Take it for what it's worth. Like I said, they're not all going to be wall hangers, but I just wanted to show you the process. I've taken the raw file and I've gone back into Adobe Camera Raw. First thing I want to do is put a couple of masks on here. We're going to take the white in the water, and we're going to punch that up a little bit. So we've taken a brush mask and we're going to increase the whites a little bit so that they stand out a little bit. Keep just a little blue to match the sky. Add a little texture, dehaze it a little bit maybe. Now we're going to get a second mask. I know you can just select the sky. Sometimes I do that. I really want to have this more of a gradient this time. We're going to darken the sky, add some contrast. Again, you don't want to overdo any of this. Just trying to get a little more of a dynamic range in that sky. Again, we can dodge and burn it more later and change the temperature and all those kind of things, but for now, brought out a little bit more color in that sky and punched out those whites. See the difference? So let's go ahead and save it. Sometimes I save them with different names, A, B, C, D, E, so that you can always go back 1 or 2 steps if that's what you want to do. There's the moon. It's a beautiful moon. The sky had a little pink in it. I think I can get something out of it. I think we'll get an image out of this. The next thing we need to do is bring in the moon. And what I did was I shot the moon at 300 millimeter. The image of the beach is at 44 millimeter. Now, if you were to stick that moon in there at 300 millimeter, it's going to look a little ridiculous. But I don't really want it at 44 millimeter because then it looks a little too small. So I've reduced it down somewhere around 75, 80 millimeter. And I've selected it. We want to copy it. Come back over here for our moon. Paste it in there. Voila. Now let me show you what you can do with that moon. You can reduce the opacity and reduce the fill so that it looks a little bit more realistic, even though in fact it really was that bright in that sky. Only, like I said, it was only another frame or 2 over, but because of all the seaweed I had to do it this way. We're going to flatten the image, then we're going to go back into Camera Raw. We're going to reduce the texture. We're going to reduce the clarity. We're going to up the dehaze a little bit, increase the vibrance a hair, cool it down a little bit, add a touch more magenta. Now we're going to resave it again. Let's check our levels. Flatten it. We have a little hot spot here we need to take care of. Burn that in just a little bit. Now the last thing we're going to do, now ordinarily I wouldn't do this for a moonrise shot. I would just have a moonrise and I would take the shot as it was. But like I said, because of the seaweed and all, it's one of the few times I'll move that moon, but it was the actual moon, and because I'm doing that, this is why I'm going to color it up a little differently than when I would normally do it. I have these borders. You can make your own or find borders somewheres. And there we go. Wasn't really the shot we wanted, but we went out, shot the full moon, and we did get a good image. It's not a portfolio shot, but you know, it gives you a little bit of practice, not only with your photography, but I think it teaches you that sometimes you just can't control the elements. And you try to make lemonade out of some sour lemons, or however the saying goes. The point is that you just try, and you try to come up with something, and that's what I did here. So if you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. Help me out a little bit. Thanks for watching. Likes and subscribes are appreciated. Until next time, take care.